to move on now to our first session of the day, which is entitled Ancient Identity 2. And we're going to start with Heidi Jauhiainen. I'm so sorry. I know I've butchered your name. Please forgive me. She has a doctorate in Egyptology from the University of Helsinki in Finland, and her dissertation from 2009 dealt with feasts at the workmen's village of Deir el-Medina. After, she studied computer science and worked in 2 digital humanities projects unrelated to ancient Egypt. But since the beginning of 2021, she is finally back in Egyptology, working to produce machine-readable hieroglyphic texts. So we'll be hearing about the state of encoded hieroglyphic texts. Heidi, thank you so very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Heidi, I think we're ready. There we go.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you for organizers for having me here. And hello to everybody from Finland. I want to talk to you about encoded hieroglyphic texts and explain to you what they are. But I will start by telling about digital methods and machine readable texts, because that's why I need I need encoded hieroglyphic texts. Then I will talk a little bit about hieroglyphs in order to explain why we need encoded texts for them. And there are several ways of encoding hieroglyphic texts, and I will present them to you. To finish the presentation, I will tell you what I plan to do to produce texts that can be used with digital methods. So with digital methods, one can study large numbers of texts fast and find statistical regularities or irregularities that one wouldn't otherwise see. But in order to use digital methods, the texts have to be machine readable. And of course, a book is not machine readable. And if you scan a book and turn it into a PDF, it might be machine readable, but it depends on what program you use to do that. Word documents are machine readable, but only in a specific software, Word, and some other softwares. But for digital methods, the text should preferably be machine readable by all different programs, sort of basic programs. Now, for large modern languages such as English, there are openly available digital corpora of texts, and these corpora can be huge, and they can be meant to be digital from the beginning, such as Wikipedia. Now, a smaller corpus is sufficient for many purposes, and there are several corpora built specifically for historical research. Assyriology, for example, has really downloadable corpora of machine-readable texts, such as open, richly annotated cuneiform corpus, or ORAC. But the lack of such corpora hinders the digital study of ancient Egyptian texts. Now, with a corpus of machine-readable texts, one can, for example, identify languages or text genres and so on. And with machine-readable texts, one can train new digital methods. For example, in order to use optical character recognition, or OCR, on hieroglyphic texts, the method would first have to be trained with annotated texts, lots of annotated texts. On a smaller corpus, one can use the search function and study frequencies of words or phrases, for example. And one can study regularities of how words or signs appear in those particular texts. Now, just a little bit about hieroglyphs. They were, of course, generally used in monumental texts, and they can be written in different directions, from right or left and from up down. But when writing literature or letters or administrative text on papyri or so-called ostracas here in the picture, ancient Egyptians usually used the so-called hieratic writing. And that is a cursive handwriting that is based on the hieroglyphic writing. Hieratic could also be written from up down, but at least in the non-literary documents of the New Kingdom, it was generally written from right to left. In Egyptology, hieratic documents are generally published in books with a photograph, or with a facsimile, a line drawing of the object, or nowadays both photograph and a facsimile. And the hieratic text is usually transcribed back into hieroglyphs. The hieroglyphs used to be drawn by hand, but nowadays they are produced with computers. Now, having hieroglyphic writing in a book is not as easy as the writing with Latin letters. Before computers, some publishing houses had in the manual typesetting movable types for hieroglyphs, but mostly the texts were written by hand. So in this example, we have both typesetting hieroglyphs and handwritten on the same page. Hieroglyphic text in a published book is not machine readable. Even if one scans the book and turns it into a PDF, and the computer can actually understand the writing in the Latin letters, it can't read the hieroglyphs. And the search function, for example, does not work. And the hieroglyphs in a book are often more like a picture. The hieroglyphic texts need to be encoded in order to display them correctly in books. But why is this? And why not just have a font for writing them, a font that a computer could understand? Now, hieroglyphs have different functions, and one sign can have different function in different contexts. And sometimes signs can be used to denote what they depict, like here the sandal strap on the left, but most hieroglyphs also have a phonetic value. And with that, other words that have the same consonants can be written. And the sandal strap sign, ankh, can be used to write the word life. Then classifiers, which are also good determinatives, are used at the end of a word to tell the different words with the same consonants apart. With a sitting man, ankh becomes a living person. And with a man pointing to his mouth, it becomes an oath or the verb to swear. Now, hieroglyphic text does not indicate word boundaries, just like, for example, Akkadian, nor does it tell where the sentence ends. But the main reason why we need encoding when using hieroglyphs in a computer is that hieroglyphs were written in kind of boxes. A sign is often above or even over another sign. So in order to display the signs properly, hieroglyphs are encoded with Latin letters and Arabic numbers. The codes come from the so-called Gardiner sign list, which is a standard reference list for Egyptian hieroglyphs. The list was compiled by Sir Alan Gardiner in 1927 for his Grammar of Middle Egyptian. And the letters refer to various categories of signs, while each sign has a number within the category it belongs to. When encoding the text, it's also possible to use the phonetic value of a sign as the code for it, at least if the sign only has one value. And then the encoding resembles more of the transliteration, which is here on the bottom line. And actually to write it that way is easier for Egyptologists because they are used to transliterating hieroglyphic texts. The most often used encoding is called manual decodage, which has been used as a kind of a standard since 1988. In order to get a sign above another one, manual decodage uses a colon. And to indicate that signs are next to each other, one uses an asterisk. Now, one of the problems with manual decodage is that it cannot be used to indicate different sizes of signs. And sometimes a sign is nested inside another one or over another one. And you can't do that with manual decodage. These two signs, which are nested, they are actually one sign in the Gardiner list. So they have the code U4. But these two signs, although they make a very often used word to speak, they do not have just one sign. And this example shows how manual decodage displays the signs. This next example shows how the words were usually written. So the snake is kind of wrapping around the hand. Manual decodage is used in various softwares that are often operating system specific. And in each software, these things have been dealt differently. For example, in a software called Chases, it is possible to manually position the signs and resize the signs as well. But then the coding looks something like this. Quite complicated. In Chases, there are also ready-made signs where a cliff is, for example, over another one. Or you can use the @ sign to do this. But like I said, these measures are program specific. And that's another problem with manual decodage. There are several implementations of it that differ from each other. Mark-Jan Nederhoff proposed a new encoding system, which he called Revised Encoding Scheme, or RES. And with RES, the signs can be nested and positioned over each other in multiple ways. And the position is not absolute, but it's in reference to other signs and to the top and bottom and the start and end of the sign group. RES has not been widely adopted by Egyptologists, and the main objections to RES have been that it takes too long to write because of the precise commands. And it's also considered irrelevant because Egyptologists usually use graphical interfaces to type hieroglyphs and are used to manual decodage coding used in those interfaces. And also because the coding has just been a phase when publishing texts, and the coded texts have not been needed after the book or article is out. Unicode is another kind of encoding. Since 2009, the Unicode has included over 1,000 hieroglyphic signs. However, it was only possible to position the signs one after another. So it's not really proper hieroglyphic writing. In 2019, the so-called format control characters for positioning the hieroglyphic signs were introduced in Unicode in its version 12. But producing hieroglyphic text with Unicode is not easy because the hieroglyphic characters are outside the so-called basic multilingual plane. Okay, that means that unlike many Unicode characters, such as the Coptic letters that have a 4-digit Unicode hex input, that's how it's called, hieroglyphs have 5 digits. And this makes them more difficult for even computers to handle. And I know of a specific virtual keyboard to write Unicode hieroglyphs, but it does not seem to have the format controls to position the signs. Well, not yet anyways. There are also fonts for Unicode hieroglyphs, but they require specific tools depending on where you want to use the font in, whether it's a web page or a document. So you cannot just download the font and start writing hieroglyphic text into a Word document, not with the correct positions of signs anyways. So all the different encoded hieroglyphic texts, they are machine readable, and Egyptology has thus a tradition of producing machine readable texts. Unfortunately, there is no tradition of publishing those texts. And instead, they are actually sometimes just discarded after the book has been published. A transliteration of a text on, for example, a plain text file would also be machine readable, or as a TEI file or XML file. But of course, transliteration is already an interpretation of the text, and it's not possible to see which signs were used and how. Of course, it would be preferable to have both versions of the text for the use with digital methods. So I am planning to publish the text that I used for reconstructing the festival calendar of Deir el-Medina in my PhD. And in the dissertation, only the relevant passages were mentioned, but I want to publish the whole texts. And I want the text to be machine readable. The planned workflow is this. I encode the text with the JSS software. And JSS is one of those platforms for producing hieroglyphic texts with manual decodage. The good thing about JSS is it can be used in both a PC and a Mac. And from JSS, it is possible to export the text as pictures, vector graphics, PDFs, and so forth. And you can also copy out the manual decodage code and the text as Unicode. I then want to transliterate the encoded text with an automatic transliteration method. And Serge Rochemorduk published very recently a method which uses deep learning and has been trained with sentences in about 4,000 texts annotated in the Ramses project. The method takes encoding as input, and it works well with short sentences of texts. But in the texts I work with, the sentences are not marked and they span often over line boundaries. So Rochemorduk's system does not always work, especially when I want to transliterate an entire document at one go in order to get the words at the line breaks also transliterated correctly. So I'm working to develop my own transliteration method that would work also on longer texts. But we'll see how that goes. Now, as the automatically produced transliterations, it's a it's a raw transliteration, obviously. It needs to be checked and in places also corrected. And I want to publish the text in as many different versions as possible. I want to publish the CLIF files produced in JSS so that the text can be worked on later. I will also publish the manual Decodash code for use in digital methods. Hopefully, in the future, the Unicode will be easier to handle and work with. So I will publish the Unicode versions also. Unfortunately, of course, since the Unicode is produced with manual Decodash in JSS, it does not contain all the format controls. But maybe they can still be used for something. And I will, of course, publish the transliterations of the texts. And these will hopefully be useful for Egyptologists. And all the different versions of the text will be offered for free download. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that fascinating presentation. I found it very interesting, and I think the audience did as well. We had someone asking about the specific computational architecture you're using for the project. Would you be able to speak on that a little bit more?
I wonder if that's about the transliteration method that is meant.
I am not sure. It's someone from a computing background rather than an Egyptological background. If Creo, if you have can you rephrase the question maybe, and then I can ask Heidi if she could talk on that for us. And we had one other question. Let me find it. Less a question, more a comment, I think. Someone saying the problem with hieroglyphic transcription is that it is being created for hieroglyphic word processors, and only later it was discovered that you can then encode it for thesauri and databases. We do not seem to have any other questions.
Yeah, the problem with hieroglyphs is that especially the programs that you can encode hieroglyphs with, is that originally it's meant for publishing the text in a book. So it's people don't think about the encoded text as important, or haven't been thinking.
That makes sense. How big is the data set that you're working with?
I have about 400 texts in my dissertation, because I used not just the text that mention feasts, but also texts that tell when the workmen were working in the Valley of the Kings, in the tomb of the king, or when they were free, so having a free day, indicating that it might be a holiday. So about 400 texts. How far I will get with this depends on my funding. I only have funding for this year, and I'm applying more funding, so it depends on that. For the automatic transliteration method, Serge Rochemauduc already tried the sort of deep learning, where you can't really, it's kind of a black box. You put the texts in and then you get out something, and it works quite nicely. But I was thinking of, since he published the text that he used for it, to use those to try something more rule based and based on the already known transliteration of each word, but maybe also kind of bigrams or trigrams, so how different words occur together to get the transliteration for the words that you don't have in the list of words. But that's something I'm trying. And Serge, yes, he had 4,000 texts to work with, so that's a lot of machine readable texts for others to use too.
Excellent, thank you so much. Well, I'm afraid we're not going to get to the other questions because we do need to move on to our next presenter, but thank you, that was fascinating and very informative.